Thanks, Rathia. We're messing Rathia around. Apologies for that. We're a bit disorganized today. Before we go into the public session, we just have Victor Brzezinski who's going to join us tomorrow. He's done some work on our own board assessment and processes, so he's just going to sit there in the observer seat for now. Victor will give you coffee and something else soon. Apologies. Okay, I think we're ready to rock and roll. Everybody, before we start, give me 1 minute. Just waiting for Martin and James to sit. Victor, if you're desperate for coffee, there is a coffee machine outside. You're welcome to pop out if you want to. Okay, Martin, are you ready for me? Okay.
Sorry, you're asking me who that Victor was, so
We'll say it all, they're not in the public session. Okay, I think we can start the public session. Everybody comfortable? Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Gabriela and James for the IESBA session, and we also have Tom here for the joint session afterwards, and then a session with the IAASB. So, Gabriela, as always, we spent time yesterday to work through the papers that we have from our side and to prepare. Thank you for your report and thank you for your slides. What I would like to do, as always, is hand over to you, and maybe we can get the people to just load your slides for you, and let's talk to that. I'm going to ask the board members to pause their comments until you're finished, or if you have I would say let's go through everything you have to say, and then I'll share some of the thoughts that we pulled together out of our private discussion yesterday in preparing for the session, and then we open it up for discussion. So thank you, and over to you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Linda, and good morning to all of you. Thank you very much again for this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to this good conversation with the PIOB. Good morning also to Ken, for whom it's a very early morning. I think it's 4 a.m. in New York. And thank you for joining. And to Robert, of course, for whom it's a very late evening or night, I don't know. So thank you very much. I'll try to be quick. I think that we have 15 minutes for this session, right, Linda? I will go.
Yes, I would say it would be really good if you maybe go through your slides in 10, 15 minutes, and then we rather have more time for the discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to do it. I don't know if we have the slides on the screen, but as we wait, so the agenda for this meeting, should it be me moving the slides, or, sorry, can I ask to move the slides, or should I move? Thank you, Martin. So the agenda for today is quite simple. I just want to thank you very much, Martin. I just want to give the PIOB a very brief sight of the discussions that we have been having internally on how to position the IESBA in a very specific context and circumstance, and then give you a brief update of the ongoing work of the IESBA on the different projects, namely on from culture and governance, CIVs, private equity, and sustainability. So this is our short agenda for today. So we took the first, as I mentioned in my report to the PIOB, we took the first 2 or 3 months of the year to pause a little bit and reflect on ourselves as a standard setting board. And this comes at a time where we finalized the sustainability standards project, which kept us very busy, as you know, over the last 2 years. So this was really time to take a deep breath and think about what's next, even if we have a plan, of course, but also to look, and mainly to look around and think about the contextual influences that we need to be attentive to, namely this context of, geopolitical tension, political changes, the trends of deregulation versus simplification, which is creating having some impacts on trust, generally, not on the IESBA, but generally. This focus on competitiveness focus, and we are not positioning ourselves politically or whatever, but we need to understand what's happening and to see what we, as an ethics and independent standards board, have to provide and should provide and be doing in this context. And of course, the matter of trust is critical, is key for us. This is ultimately what we do, is to try to provide materials, standards that help creating trust and reinforcing trust, not only in the profession and in financial and non-financial information, but more generally in business, economy, as we see them, to help fostering consistency in a context where there is a lot of fragmentation, different trends, uncertainty, and etc. They can act as an anchor for stability because ethics is more resilient to these changes, to these political tensions, and etc. Ethics is essential. Then what we do with ethics, translating them into principles, it's the big mission of this board. But we really think that in this context of uncertainty, the context of change, and etc., if anything, ethics becomes even more important. Even if and also if you think about this deregulation trend, where we foreseeably will have less rules, less detailed rules, and consequently a different kind of supervision, the ethics baseline, the ethics codes, the ethics standards become even more important to provide a stable baseline of principles, provisions, and etc. that may guide professionals doing their job in this context. So the board has been reflecting on all this, and we have clear that this is a time for us to consolidate the many standards advanced over the last, say, 5 years, through a strong focus on adoption and implementation. You know that we created a specific working group for that purpose, and it's really time to make the best out of the code and of the very rich standards, ethics and independent standards in the code, and make sure that with our help, the users will be able, the profession regulators, and etc., will be able to adopt them and implement them properly. So this focus on adoption and implementation, it's not only a strategic positioning from the board to reinforce its offer, its work in that respect, but also a matter of consolidating the standards. This, of course, will go hand in hand with the slowdown of the standard setting intensity, as you are seeing from our work plan. We think that the profession, the users, the environment need this, not a full pause, because there are still a few things that we need to do, namely to address emerging topics, but it is a deliberate decision to slow down the pace of standard setting and increase stakeholder dialogue, which is part of our adoption and implementation project. So with this, if the slide changes, which is not the case, can I ask for your help with this? I will go quickly through the different projects and areas where the IESBA is doing work. Consistent with this approach, everything that we are doing now has this context in mind. And the first of one about which I'd like to say something is on firm culture and governance. And I'll keep on speaking, if you don't mind, even without the slides, or?
Rathia is trying to sort it. I don't know why it's not the button. It worked perfectly yesterday. Oh, there we go. Okay.
So should I wait, right? Oh, okay, it's already there. I'm sorry. So farm culture and governance is one of the big or the most relevant areas where we have been working intensively, not only over the last year, where we have been doing a lot of research, fact-finding, etc. The PIOB is completely aware of the work and of the conclusions, and etc. In December, we approved the report. The board approved the staff report, and the decision was to develop to form two working groups, one on standard setting, the other on non-authoritative material, which is a word that I don't like, but it's how everyone recognizes it. Maybe we should name it differently. So, and the reasons for this project, they have been extensively shared with this group and discussed in detail from many perspectives. But it's really about trying to provide the firms with materials which will only help them become more ethical and avoid a few problems and add to their value proposition. This is a constructive, collaborative approach that we are taking. I will not forget what Dave Sullivan once said here about try to put it in a positive, constructive way. That's exactly what we have been doing. This outreach that we have been doing clearly shows that there are good examples already. We are very happy to see that some firms are making developments and taking decisions already responding to the report without waiting for standards or whatever, which is very significant from demonstrating the importance that this has, and that the firms, or a part of them at least, are understanding the value of what we are doing. The idea and the journey and the road is really to identify these good examples, these good practices, these good approaches to firm culture and governance, and try to elevate these individual examples into principles that may apply to, I'm not going to say all the firms, because this is going to be proportionate and scalable, but to many more firms than just individual examples that we are seeing. So this is about trying to avoid some consequences that we know result from some ethical lapses, and that individual ethical lapses most of the time result from fragile or weak firm culture and governance. We are all the product of what's around us, be it in a family, in a profession, in a group, in a company, in a board or whatever, and this is the reality also for the firms. This is well established in the sociology, organizational psychology, and etc., that the culture and the governance determines sometimes the individual behavior. So this is really about trying to provide something that helps the firms creating the right environment, institutional, organizational environment, to uphold and elevate ethical individual behaviors throughout the firm. So the objective, I mean, I'm not going to go into details, but there were some questions, and there are still some questions about how this connects with ISQM1 on IAASB side. There were some concerns that we might be overlapping, duplicating, making it reopen, and etc. It's not the case, and we are addressing this topic, you know, on a day-by-day basis, very carefully, speaking with IAASB staff, with Tom, and etc. This is about a different thing. This is not, the objective is not the same. The objective is not overlapping. The objective is not duplicating. It's about a different thing. It's about developing a culture and a governance framework which may reinforce the high standard of ethical behavior within the firm. So, if anything, what I can ensure to the PIOB is that this is well on our radar, and that we are addressing this very carefully to make sure that, first, there will be no duplications. Secondly, that this will not, as some stakeholders are afraid of, this will not force reopening ISQM1. We know that the profession is having a hard time in implementing ISQM1. It's a very important standard, and it's not our purpose, and it's not our objective, and it's not what we are going to do, something that impacts ISQM1 and forces reopening it. This is about a completely different thing. ISQM1 has a risk-based approach to design the components of a system of quality. This is not about the same thing. It's a principles, or as we see it, a principles-based framework across some dimensions. Of course, there are some areas of intersection, I would say, but this happens with everything that we both do. It's not the first time. So, of course, it's important that we are aware of this and that we are listening very well to our stakeholders to be careful in this respect, but I think that there is no risk that any problem will arise. Some aspects of ISQM1 are relevant, but the firm culture and governance is not an extension or a duplication of ISQM1. So the decision was to form these two groups, one on standard setting, principles-based, scalable, proportional, in close coordination with IAASB. One thing that is clear to us is that there will be no one-size-fits-all approach. We will not set standards which work the same way for all the firms. It is possible that some of them will just be left out, at least from some of the parts of it, as we reflect upon how burdensome and how useful, this connection, this interaction between, cost and benefit and etc. So there will be no one-size-fits-all. This is not going to be probably a standard for all the firms, but we will need to calibrate it properly and design and set the line where it should be set. And then non-authoritative material, on which we are putting a lot of our cards. This is going to be really important because this is about creating awareness. This is about bringing other stakeholders in the loop and calling for their responsibilities and for them to position themselves as they should in terms of contributing to create proper, strong ethical culture and governance at the firm's level. Not everything can be done by the IESBA at all. We are just trying to provide part of what is necessary in that respect. Another area where we have been working, and the PIOB has been following this very carefully from the start, as it resulted from a proposal a long time ago and a request from the PIOB. It's not that we don't see need and importance in this project. We do, but this is very familiar to you. Including this in the firm culture and governance project. Everywhere the question comes, and it's probably conceptually a fair question. As I explained before, these are issues at different level of maturity. It would be very risky to include this in the firm culture and governance project, even if we admit that one day in the future they may, not merge, but meet or whatever. What we are doing now is trying to clearly understand the risks and opportunities of this phenomena. We have a list that I presented to the PI in the last board meeting about the list of opportunities and risks that we have already identified. From the IESBA perspective, what matters is if there are some increased risks in terms of ethics and independence, and that's what we are doing, identifying these possible increased risks resulting from this private equity investment. You have some of them there: firm culture, pressure, conflicts of interest, confidentiality. These are some of the risks that we have seen, and there will be a staff alert that we will be soon publishing, identifying these risks or alerting for these risks, and directing stakeholders to the code and to the solutions and responses that the code already includes to these topics. Then in the future we may or not be doing something else, but for the time being we think it's very useful that the firms will have this kind of guidance about which are the risks that they should be attentive to, and look at the code to get the responses, the support, and etc. that already sits in the code for these questions. And finally, and this is going to be my last slide, sustainability, nothing new for this board. We did a joint launch as very much requested and asked by PIOB, among others, and it was the right thing to do, given this is a package. This was in late January, and what we are doing now is adoption and implementation, adoption and implementation, adoption and implementation. We both created specific groups, let's call it like them, but IMAG, it's the group that we are creating to respond to a request also from the PIOB, or initially from the PIOB, to create some kind of platform to monitor the implementation of the sustainability standard of the IESA. That's being done. We already have a chair. I'm not going to reveal it because it's not yet public, but it's a board member. From the firms, by the way, because we need people who are very much involved in the work. And this group is going to be composed by in that respect. Just as a note, the IESA was already adopted in Australia 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, I don't remember, through the IAASB, through the IAASB, but then they are consulting, which points directly to the IESA, so applies to the IESA directly, but they are still consulting to include it in the law. And I'm going to stop here, Linda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gabriela, for that, and thank you for your report as well. We will, in the joint session, talk a little bit more about just what are you seeing through your 5,000 or sustainability between the two boards, adoption and implementation plan, and so on. So we'll park that one for now. We said for purposes of your session, we really want to focus on firm culture and governance, but there might be one or two other comments that come out. I'm going to attempt to just maybe at a high really important topic, and we agree and we recognize it. For now, I'm just going to park a little bit the coordination or the link to ISQM1, because we might pick that up in that session as well, depending on whether we've got time, but maybe just leaving that aside for a moment. What we still battle with, and we really think it's an important topic and we see the need for it, but we battle with understanding. I'm sure you have it very clear in your minds as a board, but we battle to understand. And we get that, but I think for purposes of people out there that's ultimately going to comment on your exposure draft and very importantly going to have to implement this, it should be quite clear, the why and the what. So we thought about it in our discussions, and if we think about what you're trying and sort of to move towards, which are important, and that is to give stronger ethical governance, guidance, structures, etc., at the firm level. So it seems like it's all around the scoping. It seems like the scoping is really to come up at a firm level with, and at firm level we don't just talk about the audit side. It seems as if it's also the other service lines, which is obviously very important, to come up with what are important principles, and you've made that comment often about it's a principle-based, it will be principle-based standard. What are the important principles that the firm need to consider in its design? And secondly, what are the important principles, and that might flow into policies, practices, etc., that the firm needs to concentrate on and put into place to manage, govern ethical behavior of its people. And the third one is potentially, and also what's the overlay of transparency that the firm also needs to put out so that they can demonstrate that there's good governance, that there's ethics, ethical behavior, and that they have a governance structure to govern ethics. And it goes back to those principles of independence, managing conflict of interest, quality, and transparency, which is in any event in the code. We do think that there's a risk on the quality and audit quality side that it can get its tentacles into ISQM 1, and therefore it's really important to understand, you know, how we're comfortable and how do you make sure between the two boards that there's not an overlap when it comes to quality, because ultimately ISQM 1 goes into policies, processes, structures that also govern independence and things like that. So that's something that's sort of maybe the second point. Other than not fully understanding the scope and the problem statement, we're not fully understanding why we're saying that this is not in the space of ISQM 1. Setting corporate governance principles for firms, and maybe it is that. You know, if you start talking about the firm, the composition of the board and non-executive directors and so on, so maybe it is setting governance principles, but it's just being very clear on that and the link between setting good corporate governance principles and ethics, you know, because this is an ethics code, it's not a corporate governance code, but I just think that's something that's necessary to articulate very well. It's part of the conversation we had. You spoke about tone at the top before. All of those things are very important principles that we think lead into that behavior, how people behave and so on. We agree with the comments that you and your board have made, that it must be principle-based, but it can't just be principle-based. Obviously, it probably needs those examples and practical practices that potentially need to be put in place to get you to best practice. It's at an engagement level, because you can say if this is a public interest audit or a listed company audit or whatever, then auditors have to comply with these rules, like the non-audit services rules and so on. But it's very different if you know, a firm either has it or hasn't, and what if the firm then is doing a small subsidiary audit in a group? So just, I think it's important to understand what those scalability rules will be. And let me just see, I think there was one more comment that I wanted to make. Oh, and this is actually a quite important one. And we see a lot of the questions about the code and the value of the code and the implementability of the code. I'm not sure if that's a real word, but anyway, it is important also for firms to see the value. Now, I come from a corporate governance background, so I believe good governance add value to an organization. But it is important that the firms that will be subject to these requirements must also understand and see the clarity and see the value proposition. So those were some of the key points that we've made. I'm going to just check if I've got any additions for now from the board, and then I'm going to go back to you. Everybody happy if I just circle back? Dave wants to say something.
And maybe this is just a point of clarification, and Gabriela, I think I know the answer to this, but it sounds like what the board is working toward is both standard setting and some sort of practice aids, NAM, whatever you want to call it. I guess one of the questions would be, could there be a scenario where as you go through this, maybe standard setting isn't part of this, but practice aids and amplifying best practices would be enough. I don't know the answer to that, but I just asked the question.
So thank you very much, Linda and Dave and PIOB for the comments. This is really important to discuss here and to try to bring some clarity, the possible clarity, given the stage of the process where we are. Anyway, stating the problem, Linda, I tried, but for us, it's very clear in our mind, and the problem that we are wanting to address is the following. The IESBA has been working for a long time, setting standards to address individual behavior, individual ethical lapses within the firms, by accountants, and etc. This is the focus. This has been the focus of the code. The code vaguely refers to culture and governance at some point, or culture of the firm, but it's a very, very, very minor and basic touch on that topic. As we considered our strategy and work plan, it was brought to our attention that if you're doing such great work, and it's not only you, it's regulators, it's PAOs, it's the profession, etc., but it still exists, and sometimes exists in a way that it does not affect one person in the firm. It's a collective problem. Think about the ethical, the cheating on exams. It's not one individual behavior. It's a pervasive within the firm, and the problem seems to be even more relevant that we know. Anyway, just an example. So if this happens, it's because probably there is something in the firm's organization, way structuring, culture and governance that provides room for these ethical lapses to happen. And that's what we want to address. And that's why the result that we see, the objective, the public interest objective that we are trying to achieve is that with some additional instruments, some additional tools, some additional materials, the firms can become more robust in terms of creating incentives for good practices and avoiding some ethical lapses within the firm. So this is ultimately about ethics. Linda, you said maybe you are trying to set up corporate governance or governance principles for firms. I mean, we can use the words as we want, but ultimately this is about ethics. And the two things are very well connected, as you know. If you look at the OECD principles, they include references to ethics. You go through the OECD principles, and ethics is there, and the need to adopt ethics standards. So the connection between the two, it's obvious, because governance, it's part of what drives ethics and ethical behavior. So our purpose and objective is not an objective per se in itself of setting governance standards. A bit forward, and this is for the whole firm, as you said, Linda. This is not only for auditors, it's for all lines of service within the firm, because we know that sometimes the problems also happen in these interlinks and interconnections between consulting, tax, audit, and etc. So the same structure should be, or the same governance and same principles should be in place for all of those within the firm, because it's the firm that drives then the individual behavior. With respect to the concrete topics, I mean, independence, transparency, rewards, incentives, ethical leadership, and etc., we will see how each one can be addressed in terms of making the right, producing the right principle. But to the question about how are we going to decide what's going to go into the standards and it's going to go into the NAM, and how are we going to put in place this scalability approach, I don't have an answer yet, and it would be very dangerous if I would have an answer now. Because as you know, we are now running, organizing global roundtables. We had already one in New York, one in Brussels, one in Melbourne, one with the Forum of Firms. We had a deep dive with the Forum of Firms, 4 or 5 years of discussion with the Forum of Firms. 2 virtual roundtables, one for Africa, one for Latin America. So this is the time of collecting information. It's not that we don't know where we are going, but it would be dangerous to say this is going to be the dividing line. Is it a challenge? Yes, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge, and the criteria will always be the benefit that we see coming from the scoping in some firms, in some principles, and the burden or the less relevant public interest impact. I give you an example, and I'm not saying that this is going to be this, but for instance, independence. It's not the same if we are speaking about a Big 4 firm or a 2 partners firm somewhere, because independence does not mean the same. And we are not even saying that we are going to say, or that you have to have independence this way with a director and etc. Even the way that these principles will be applied, there should be a lot of room, and that's why this is going to be principles-based, for the firms which are going to be scoped in, probably not all of them, to decide how they want to apply the principle and achieve the result. So, and between the two, the principle that we want to state and the objective that is going to be clear to everyone, the firms should be free or get space to apply them according to their structure, their capacity, their very many things. Principles-based more and examples. I'm not sure that I got your question exactly, but yes, what the board decided in December was...
I think you have actually responded to that, to say that the principles and, you know, what are some of the practices?
Yeah. So the relationship between standards and NAM, it's going to be very, very, very close. Again, I'm going to reinforce what I said. NAM is not going to be, if anything, extremely important here because it's a new space. So it's not only a matter of education, awareness raising, blah, blah, blah. To your question, Dave, of course, until the day of the certification of anything or whatever, everything is open. This is what the board decided upon the information that we collected, upon some guidance that we got even here. I remember here in these rooms hearing, remember that you are a standard setter, you are not a think tank. And that is very clear in our minds, and we received that guidance from the PIOB, from IOSCO, from IFIAD, and even the firms, some of them, I think they were fine with having something, provided that it's really principles-based, that it's really high-level, and it's really scalable. Now, let me just say this because I need to be absolutely clear about this. If you did not ask me, but I'm going to respond. How are the firms reacting to this, or stakeholders reacting to this project? We see a lot of uncertainty. They don't know exactly what's going to come up out of this project, and that's why we are anticipating something probably for June already, which is like a straw man about what we might want to do, so that everyone, the PIOB, the firms, and everyone can see and take a position in face of something which is more concrete. It's going to be a little bit a challenge to come up with something by that time, but we want to be early enough to give everyone that opportunity. We are having some pushback from the firms, that's clear, and with very strong voices and vocal, not probably not always the best way, but that's what's happening. And for that reason, also, we need to have clarity about the position and the vision of stakeholders including the PIOB, about this project. We don't want to work in the silence. This is what's happening. I think that it's interesting that some of the firms and the big ones, they seem to be on board with this and very collaborative. There is some noise at other levels, so we need to have clarity about the position of all stakeholders from all groups about this project so that we can make decisions, Dave, with respect to how to move forward, how much it is going to be.
Okay, I think we need to take quite a couple more questions. And Gabriela, thank you for those responses. I think whether straw man is the right first step, that's something that you need to debate. I do think it's really important for stakeholders to understand the scope, the problem statement. And I also, your comments on the firms are really important because some of them might be quite sophisticated already in this, and it's probably value proposition-wise worthwhile to have those conversations with them to understand how you can take the best practices out of that. So I'm going to take 3 comments at a time and circle back to you. Let's be brief that we can get to everybody's questions and comments. I'll start there with you, Mark, Sandy, Philippe on this side, and then we'll continue.
Yes, thanks, Linda, and thanks, Gabriela. I think we've seen significant sort of scandals, whether it be exam cheating, the issues in Australia, in recent years, that I think it would actually be, it could be seen as being somewhat remiss if IESBA didn't actually look at firm culture and governance in some way. I support the concept of you having this project, and I think it's also very important that this is a firm-wide thing, because I mean, if you look at the Australian situation, I mean that didn't come out of audit, but I recognise that there is a potential crossover between the firm culture and governance deliberations and ISQM1, which would have to be handled. But it's very important, I think, that it covers the firm as a whole. As you know, I attended the roundtable in Brussels, and Robert and Janine attended in New York and Melbourne. And I was interested to see in your slide deck the sort of preliminary sort of thoughts that came up in those roundtables, and very consistent with what I heard in Brussels. But I think one of the questions that isn't answered in here, and you don't give any sort of feedback on, is what will the output of this project be? So if you look at the current code, it says relatively little on firm culture and governance, and what it does say is a little bit fragmented. So, and I certainly heard from a number of the participants in my sort of subgroup at the round table that they really didn't know what direction you were taking, whether you were going to just consolidate what's currently in the code, whether you're going to consolidate and enhance what's in the code, or whether you're going to produce a sort of separate corporate governance code that sits alongside the ethics code. And I'd welcome any input or thoughts you could give us about how you see the direction of the project and what you see the output being.
Well, can I ask you to just speed it up a little bit?
Yeah, all right. I think on principles-based, I agree with principles-based. I think there is a tendency, though, to write things, and I think you need to be very mindful of the word count in the final document. The word count. I don't think it would serve anybody very well to have a very long document that starts off as principles-based and ends up as a tome. So keep it principles-based and keep it brief would be my recommendations.
Thank you, Mark. And I don't think that necessarily requires a response. I'm going to take the other questions as well. I think there are lots of things to think about, and they're probably already in your list. Sandy, thank you.
Yeah, I guess mine is more in the category of thinking about than necessarily responding to me today. Is because I've spent the last, I don't know, few months dealing with consultations related to, in the US, the audit quality indicators and the firm reporting proposal. And the firm reporting proposal is basically a governance proposal. And it includes disclosures to the audit regulator and some to investors on the financial situation of the firm, their governance, their network, and their cyber risk. And it was roundly criticized as, you know, the audit regulator doesn't have the ability to have this information because it's not directly related to audit quality, which is ISQM1. I fear all of those things are coming back up against here. So you say you don't want to write governance standards for the purpose of governance standards, but of ethics. And ethics is about trust, and the opposite of trust is transparency, right? And these proposals were about transparency, and there was a big pushback of transparency. So the question that, or sort of the dilemma that I face in my own mind is how, what will these actually do if there's no transparency related to these governance measures, right? How different are they than the ethics standards that may exist today? And I can probably explain this a little bit more, but I think it would be interesting for you guys to look at the consultation responses related to that, because everything was a no. Everything was a no. Everything was impossible. It wasn't scalable, was number one. I don't think that that's as important a factor as others, because I think that there are at scale, at the largest firms, that these things are where it's most important, where trust is most eroded in the profession. So I worry about always talking about scalability, because many times it's just used to not do something. And we heard that yesterday.
Yeah.
So
Okay, Sandy, please wrap it up.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying that I would look at those consultations, because I think embedded in them are all the arguments against this proposal. And I think that you have to think through those. And I think that the reality of it is that we can create governance standards, but also the last bullet on your item was transparency, and there was a lot of pushback of transparency, and all of it was a link to audit quality. So I'm just advocating that you read through some of those.
Yeah, the transparency element is important. I think that's very good advice to maybe just have a look at those responses. Philippe?
Thank you, Linda. Sorry. Don't worry for the time length for me, because I have no declaration to make. Just a question, simple question. I fully support, your approach, your principle-based approach, because I think that at the end of the day, in terms of culture, ethical culture, the result of that should be an ethical mindset, which allows, all the professionals to cope with, situations, unpredictable situations, and having the appropriate ethical behavior. When you deal with standards or rules, because the opposite of principle-based is rule-based, you address specific situations. And out of the specific situation, you have, a broad scope of uncertainties where people can have improper behavior if they don't have this mindset based on principles and values, ethical values, which should cover, a thinking process, in front of a new animal, to say, how am I going to address that, in line with the values and principles of my ethical frame. So my question is the following, simple. When it's about principle and values, for example, honesty, transparency, things like that, how can you articulate scalability and proportionality, because when it's about honesty, there is no proportionality or scalability and so on. So this is my point, because in this, you know, scalable or proportionality, that opens a window, you know, for some improvisation regarding the ethical mindset, process of thinking and decisions.
Very good point. Thank you, Philippe. Tsecho?
Thank you. And also just following on my fellow auditors' thinking, Gabriela, is I think all of this is, we all understand the what, and perhaps the crust of the matter is in the how, and what we're going to end up delivering at the end of the day. He's talked about scalability. My thinking is around adoptability in terms of what we are seeing coming out of the comments currently. And I know we don't want to proactively judge the outcome, but what I thought we would think about is we are trying to make this a principle-based outcome at the end of the day rather than a rule-based outcome. And I'm wondering principles of enforceability at the end of the day on the principle-based principle, because the principle-based is in the current corporate governance codes that we have, you either comply and explain or comply or explain. And I wonder what the thinking around the design principles now, as we think around principle-based, what the end outcome will be as the board grapples with this principle-based outcome. Because it will either then say this will be enforceable or it won't, based on whether you're allowing people to explain or comply and explain outcome. So the design principles will be important to build in upfront. Thanks.
Thanks, Tsecho. Tom?
Thank you very much. One comment and one question. And as Philippe said, I also would like to support your articulation and your approach. And then I think it's very important project. And one comment is that when we talk about the strategy and work plan, there is two burning platform issues. The one is this firm culture governance, and the other is the ethics of the PIOB, the scope of the ethic code. But I think it's the right way to focus on the for firm culture and governance. And then I don't think it's the right time to talk about the scope of the code itself, because this, as you say, this is not a good moment to talk about that. So, but I feel some sort of a nervousness in their PA communities. But still, some of the IESBA may talk about the PIOB or ethics of a CFO. So this is not a good moment to talk about that. So this is my comment. And then one question is that a little bit untechnical, but as you said, that the coordination between IAASB and IESBA is really, really critical. And I understand that at the chair level and the staff level, the coordination is perfect, and I think it's okay. But my question is, how do you design the board level coordination between two boards? Because I understand that IAASB is really, really interested in this in terms of the relationship with the ISQM1. So I need some sort of the more concrete design between the coordination of the board. That's the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And I'm going to go to Janine and then Gabriela. I think some of these are probably pearls of wisdom, but here and there, they're probably one that you want to respond to now. So I'll just give you a chance to do that. Okay, thanks, Janine.
Thank you. Yes, I also support this project. I think it's important. I have you touched in your presentation also on the private equity investments that are, and you explained that it's not part of this project. On the other hand, it's not in that sense, the way I read it in the final paper that you issued in January, it's not part of, not that it addresses all issues around private equity specifically, but since this is a project about ethics, it should address all kind of ethical risks, issues around, resulting from all kind of structures that are out there, even from large and small firms. People have also talked about scalability, that's not actually, as some of even the smaller firms, I can think of risks, ethical risks that are even bigger in smaller firms or small offices with one dominant partner. Think about speaking up opportunities for staff in those kind of settings compared to large firms. So there are, it's about these principles are important, but scalability in a sense that, some things shouldn't apply to smaller firms. I would be very cautious with that because of some risks, ethical risks are much higher in smaller environments. The private equity is also, like any other structure, a partner model or other structures in the audit sector are addressed through this project. But there's also the private equity alert, investment alert that you have in your work stream. And there is this CIFS and pension fund survey that in my view, in essence, also has some underlying things there in those structures that are similar to private equity investments. And my question is, so there are 3 work streams where you have parts of private equity investment issues. What is your plan to communicate, because it's a hot topic, and to the outside world on how you will address this hot topic of private equity investment, how you're currently doing that, or that you envisage maybe also something else. So that's my question, and I think I leave it there.
Okay, thanks, Janine. And Gabriela, I would suggest maybe some of them are for your list. I know between you and Ken and James, you've made copious notes, so you probably don't want to respond to all of that. The one that I think is important, and it's a nice introduction to our coordination between the 2 board sessions, is the question that Tom asked around the engagement at the board level when it comes to the link between firm culture and governance and ISQM1. So maybe let's talk about that, and then it would be useful to also hear from Tom, because we want to talk about a few other collaboration projects as well. Thanks, Gabriela.
Okay, thank you very much, Linda. So we are transitioning already to the.
Hey, unless there are 1 or 2 that you have to answer now, I don't think any of those questions were necessary to give the answer now, but those are things that we asking in our minds, and maybe something that you are working on at your board.
Take note. Where is going to be anchored concerns about scalability around the table, enforceability as well, coordination, and private equity investment related issues. Okay, I'll take note, and we can discuss it. On coordination, yes, we can start by speaking about it. And I think that your question, Tom, is more about how are we putting that in practice, and how we are putting that in practice since day one is that probably the most important way of addressing that is that the staff, my staff, Tom's staff, are speaking all the time. They're having meetings. The 2 senior directors and the directors are speaking about this, about the plans, about what the impacts may be, what the risks can be, and etc. And Tom and I are speaking as well. We have board members, in charge of being specifically following up on some concerns or understanding the concerns on both sides. So we don't have a group, but we are working out, say, if anything, in a more agile way than having an established group, apart from these specific board members appointed for this purpose. So it's really an ongoing coordination approach. We already have a few things documented upon which the 2 boards have been reflecting. It's clear that it's still a little bit early days, and there can be some concerns about what this may be, and some uncertainty. But we hope that with this very strong ongoing coordination at staff level, at board level, at chairs level, we will avoid any kind of problems. Of course, we know that everyone is very attentive, so if there is any red flag, it will come as well. And we are very open and doing the job internally to make sure that there will be no problem in that respect. So I think that's more than that. Tom, I don't know if you
Tom,
want
you
to.
probably want to come in as well, because one of the things that we also ask ourselves, and it's not just for this, but for all the coordination projects, is there a place in some instances, and I think in some projects more than others, that you probably almost have joint board meetings to debate some of the issues collectively, because that would possibly solve, you know, some of the slight nuances, and I'm thinking about something like PI, but maybe just your thoughts on specifically firm culture and governance versus ISQM1, and maybe Tom, you also want to add a little bit on sustainability and the adoption and implementation, how the US two boards are working together and seeing what comes out of the, you know, potential discussions you're having. Thanks.
Great. So yes, I think I'll reiterate everything Gabriela said, that both boards are 100% committed for our work to be interoperable and not to create undue friction. I think that is something that we see as an absolute in this process. We have, in addition to all the staff stuff, as Gabriela said, there's real board involvement here. Like, we've assigned effectively a board member leader to lead our interaction at the board level, and then able to raise issues. We expect, like we've had on many topics, joint board sessions. Remember, this is an approach we took quite successfully on 5,000 to make sure and sign off on the interoperability of those two standards. So yes, it's a risk, but this is something, but it's also an opportunity, if we get this right, to show a model of continued coordination and cooperation. It's on the top of our agenda. We expect, as they say, building out the straw man. My expectation is that whatever straw man is going to be built out, it will be considering the interlinkages and the complementarity of the two frameworks. So that is very much on my mind, will always be on my mind, and I think it obviously, as those things, it's a risk, but it's a risk that's being well mitigated, and there's total commitment between Gabriela and me in the process. Of course, they are developing their standards, and I think that's a general theme that Gabriela and I want to highlight and reiterate here, is that there is a lot of coordination and cooperation happening at the board levels today in a way that hadn't been done years past. But we also are aware that the more we could bring the coordination and cooperation upstream at the earliest stage of the process, sort of like as we're mapping, the better we'll be. A bit of, let's be clear, when we do project proposals, we're doing this today, but getting further board involvement and team involvement as this project approaches. And remember, with the blessing and almost with the encouragement of this group and the mine group, we were running at 150 miles per hour for the last 5 years. Now, if you talk about it, I'll talk about this in my thing, is that the contextual environment where we've now sort of getting to the phase where we're taking a little bit more time to do things, it gives a little bit more time for these coordination efforts. So I wanted just to make sure that this board understands, like, that is our mindset. We're 100% committed to it. We're talking about how we could move things up better. We're getting into another strategy work plan cycle soon enough. This one ends, like, you know, standard setters, we have consultation, so to be ready for 27, we have to start working on it already, but making sure that we see these interconnections early on in the process, in the planning stages, I think will be helpful. Now, you asked us about 5,000, where, remember, the two boards had a success in terms of assuring interoperability on it. Many of the things that Gabriela said they're doing, we're doing the same, not coincidence. We want to have similar structures. We have an internal working group. We have an implementation contact group. We're going to be filtering issues. The implementation, our internal working groups will be coordinated with IESBA on course-cutting issues. We're developing joint guidance, FAQs where appropriate. You know, we talked about value chain with this body last year. You know, we had a little bit of a head start. Everyone, that's not a secret, so that's why we have stuff out in the marketplace already. But just the same, as we get issues in, get them rapidly, able to respond, the teams will be working together, see where there's cross-cutting issues, can respond. That being said, it's really early days to figure out what's going to come in. So if you ask me an example of where people are having implementation challenges, I can't really give you specifics
No,
yet.
it's certainly early days. And before I go to Philippe, maybe just one sort of related question. It's something that we sort of thought about, you know, and debated when we prepared for this, and that is whether and when and how your two boards collectively are sitting back and just regrouping on how suddenly the world has shifted on sustainability reporting, you know, because of external factors, policy makers, politicians, and so on. It was a little bit of a 180-degree turn when it comes to that, and what is and maybe that's also early days, and maybe things need to settle down a little bit of what's happening in Europe with the omnibus standard and, you know, what's happening in the US, but just how your plans are to consider this and consider the impact when it comes to your focus on sustainability. And maybe that's not something you want to respond to now, but just something that's on our minds, certainly.
Well, it's definitely on our minds. Philippe attended our board meeting. We actually had our session on this exact topic, an executive, because it's a strategy-related idea. Our current path, though, remember, regardless, there are jurisdictions adopting our standard. We continue to stand behind our standard 5,000. We think the best thing we could do is for those jurisdictions to continue to support the adoption and implementation through useful guidance and support. It may affect the way our public positioning on some matters. I think we should give due consideration on that. But again, we stand behind our standard. I'm sure Gabriela would say the same, that it was developed through robust due process with significant commitments to guidance support, and they're there for use. The timetables of when they're adopted may be impacted by this, but there are many jurisdictions around the world adopting them. And remember, people are using 3,000 today, and the reason we did 5,000 was that we were told that 3,000 doesn't provide sufficient guidance for the specificities of sustainability reporting standards.
And there's certainly many corporates that we are mostly on a voluntary basis that are doing it. I'm going to go to Philippe and Christelle, and then I'm going to circle back. Yes, Gabriela, do you want to?
Very quickly, I will make Tom's words my own. It's exactly the same approach. We also had a board reflection on all this, but there is something, our standards are framework neutral, and the beauty of this is that they adapt to the frameworks as they change. It can be less, it can be more, but you still have the independence rules and the audit rules for the framework to which they apply.
It
So
might certainly influence a little bit whether you get comments, who are people, corporates willing to give comments, you know, with adoption and implementation, but I think time will tell when it comes to that.
Linda, if I
Yes,
may, I just wanted to
James.
put this on the record because as a public session, you've asked a very strategic question, very important question. We, of course, will be engaging with our stakeholder advisory group. It's precisely the type of topic in terms of navigating the environment and the advice they would have, and that will be up on our upcoming SAC meeting.
Very good point. And I think it would be worthwhile, and maybe we'll also talk to Alan in your preparation, that it's worthwhile to maybe get some views from some of those SAC members.
It's very explicitly addressed.
Okay, Philippe, and then Dave. Oh, Philippe is okay. Thank you, Dave. You also okay, or is you?
No,
Okay.
Suggestion, but Philippe didn't, I'm not stepping on your toes here, Philippe. Okay, great. Thanks for all of that. This is kind of a specific suggestion to consider with respect to the staff alert on private equity investment in firms. I know, Gabriela, it's being done by the IESBA staff, and, but I do believe that there are aspects of private equity investment in firms that could be addressed through ISQM1, through the risk assessment process, identifying new risks that may exist as a result of private equity investment and the risk response or controls that are put in place. And so I just question whether this ought to be a joint project, because there will be aspects, if all we do is talk about independence and the independence intricities of this, I think that can be helpful, but I think there are broader implications on IAASB standards that firms ought to consider as they take on these investments. So, just a suggestion.
Yeah, and I think the other two that we spoke about as we prepared, where you potentially want to consider if it's necessary for a joint project or a very closely aligned project, might be technology. I mean, there's lots of things in the technology space, and also PI in the longer term, because clearly the PI definition, and Tom, you spoke about how there's a lot of collaboration now. That world has shifted, and that principle or the practice has shifted, and there is now a lot of collaboration between the two boards. But the PI definition is probably the poster child of what happens if there's not upfront collaboration, because there are often unintended consequences. But maybe something to think about. So I'm going to go to Janine, and I'm going to give the last word to you before we break for coffee.
Yes, thanks, Linda. Yes, in relation to the discussion that we just had, I was thinking about the adoption and implementation working group. That is to get information on implementation issues, which is, of course, the monitoring part. But do you have ideas already how that will, in terms of process and maybe accelerated process, be turned into a sort of rapid response mechanism when there are implementation issues that require a quicker response from the standard setting boards in terms of smooth implementation of the standards on sustainability. And the other thing was that I just forgot on the private equity investment alert. On your slides, I read there form over substance. And I can remember during the IESBA meeting that I observed, I actually made a different observation, that the alert should address the substance over form. So if you look at the private equity investments, and Dave is talking about risks that are broader than only independence issues, which is correct. But it's also about what kind of structure is there, and there are different structures in practice in these private equity investments. And if you look at the things that are currently in the code, but that's mostly, I think, from the independence is a big part of that, you need to not only look at what's on paper, the way they structured it, but how it's the substances of the structure. And that was, I think, that's more important, that in the alert there is also some reflection that when it comes to auditor independence considerations, that they look at how it works in practice. And that's sometimes different than what's legally in terms of the structure in writing. So for me, it's more substance, that you look at the real situation over the formality, what they put in writing.
Okay, Gabriela, I'm going to hand back to you for any final comments, responses, and before we wrap up, and if there's anything from Tom, of
Well,
course.
I think it's more thanking for all these comments, reiterate our commitment, speaking about coordination, our full commitment to keep on deepening our coordination. I heard about some possible joint projects that I think that this takes a lot of reflection, because I'm not saying that there is no room for this, but for instance on technology, I need more information about what's in your mind about a possible joint project, since the IESBA has already developed standards and NAM and etc. It's not that we cannot update, and we should, but some questions here, but of course, always open to receive good proposals. And finally, yes, I didn't say, but I take note of still on firm culture and governance, which is top of mind for us now. Take note of all the comments, good comments that we received, but also the broad support that I could read in your interventions, which is important, not only for the support, but again, because we need to have clarity about where the stakeholders stand in respect to this project, so that we can listen to everyone and make the best out of it. That's it. Thank you.
I got the only other thing to add, Janine, is our working group, internal working group, we're going through issues monthly right now. There's a monthly filtering process with the board members and the staff team to review what's coming in and what we're hearing in the marketplace. I think we could set up guidance and do guidance quite quickly if needed. We also don't exclude the possibility that there actually could be standard setting if there's a need for a surgical strike. We stated something clearly in paragraph A276. I don't know what A276 is offhand, but I'm just meaning, you know, there are different ways we could do things, and we're ready to move quickly. And once we put up the implementation contact group of actual practitioners, we'll actually be hearing things even more quickly. So numbers, things in place. On the technology side, just to be clear, like we will need to understand the ethical implications of anything we do. Set it up, like, let's not go to org structure and the organizational approach for addressing it, but that is clearly up front as we do information gathering on any quality management component. And that's really where the rubber may hit the road in terms of our technology work.
And thanks for that. The comment on let's call it the rapid response as well when it comes to sustainability is really important. It is a comment that we made when we certified, but it was also a question that we got from the investor community when we engaged with them yesterday. Will there be that mechanism if needed? So thank you very much. We're going to break for coffee. Can we all return at 25 to 12? Because we're going to go back into another public session with the IAASB and Tom. Thank you. Okay, could we settle down that we can start recording again? Just a second before we start recording.
I think obviously we need Tom, and he's just gone
Yeah. We're just waiting for Tom. Close enough. But we've lost the IAASB chair in the process, though. Okay, can we go into the public session? Thank you and welcome back, everybody. We're going into the quarterly session with the IAASB chair and leadership. I believe we don't have Willie online today. We've got Tom and James. So Tom, we'll do it in the same way that we normally do. We'll hand over to you that you can go through your slides. With Tom, just to remind the board, we said on the IAASB side, we're going to focus, obviously just spend a moment to reflect on going concern because we've been asked to certify that now, even though we've done the work on that. And then we'll spend some time on a little bit of a stand back. And Tom, also obviously a few comments on fraud because that's due for PIOB certification in the next round. So over to you.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me here today. Again, you know, we really are at an interesting moment in our board's work plan, you know, and I view this very much as that we're at a very important phase of our IAASB life at an eventful time for both the world and the accountancy profession globally. Today's discussion really sort of is an opportunity to reflect on these realities, both in terms of seeing how we're adapting our priorities and interactions, and secondly, by how we sort of have come to the close of this phase with the approval of our fraud project. Not much more to stay on going concern. You know, I gave a pretty robust update in January to you about how we addressed all the public interest issues. We believe that we've been responsive to them all, and we look forward to it being certified and then being out in the marketplace with implementation materials and support for that standard. And I think fraud goes very much with it. Well, we took those on. They were the two sort of burning issues at the time that were challenging confidence in the conduct of audit. So we've tackled those both now. So maybe we could reflect, and this slide, I've been using some form of this slide over the last few months, but this is now almost 6 years into the job. I'd like to say that we as a board have changed, but the world is changing around us. Thinking about what we set out to do 6 years ago, which was putting all the public interest at the heart of our work, so tackling issues of paramount importance to enhance confidence in audits. Secondly, just being able to move with much greater agility and speed in the marketplace. And thirdly, was doing so in such a way that engaged a much broader group of stakeholders in a much more intensive fashion and meet people where they want to have been met. I believe that we've been successful on those accounts. We are confident that our actions together, and this is really as a package, will materially improve the quality of audits and enhance the confidence of the standard setting process as well. And that is the reality. And you just think, I'll switch to this slide. If you look at the left-hand side of this page, these are all the standards we have approved. We've done some other work too, as well, but these are the major standards approved. This is a comprehensive list of standards that have been approved over the last few years. That comes after auditor reporting and 540 audited accounting estimates. This is a lot. And really, if you go back to where we are right now, we need to give the market time to absorb so that the package of standards has their intended outcome. And this is why we need to recognize it. We don't want to exhaust the marketplace, both practitioners and those who benefit from audits. And so really this is similar to, as Gabriela says, a realization that we need to provide some stability. And if you think about what that means, is we as a board have sort of committed to, and since we've cleared the decks in many ways, that there'll be no new major standards until 2027. And not only that, to get there, we need to give time for consultations, because it's the same people implementing that are commenting on our project, and they're not just commenting on ours, they're working with IESBA, they're working with the IESB, the ISSB, IOSCO, and others. So we know that we need to give space, and we know that we need to give time. We've proven that we could move quickly when needed, and we will, if needed. But there's now a moment of time just to change the pace of standard setting, not stop our work. This offers us a real opportunity. We talked about it a second ago, is as we're thinking out future projects, we have more time to set up a more robust coordination approach with IESBA. Both boards are seeing this. You see that we didn't come up with this by ourselves. We working together, thinking through the future. And then we could have more dialogue and interaction with practitioners. I know practitioners have had this concern that as the number of practitioners on our board decline, that they will lose voice and that we will become disconnected with current practice. We're not doing that. We're setting up many mechanisms to have engagement with the practitioner community out there, whether it's at the former firms level, the IFAC level, the council level, at our board, with TAs, practice fellows. We're creating a mechanism with the GPBC. We'll continue to meet with small and medium practitioners through their advisory group at IFAC. We will have events and other opportunities. It'll just be more multifaceted and sometimes more project specific, but we know that needs to continue. And then finally, where technology is definitely, from my perspective, our lead board topic going forward, we know that this has to be a consultative approach. It has to be based upon what is actually happening in the marketplace and how are regulators seeing what's happening in the marketplace. Because we want to facilitate the use of technology, and it's no good doing something that is not going to be enforceable or acceptable. And so one theme that we discussed last week when I was meeting with the Forum of Firms, but is something we discussed at the board with audit evidence and risk response, that three-way dialogues between practitioner communities, the regulatory community, and the standard setter have to be more common with us in the same room. We do a lot bilaterally, but now we have to think about new ways to maybe get people around the table. So when you have practice saying this and the regulators say this, and we try to find an approach and navigate between it, let's make sure that we're all on the same page, so we're not talking past each other. How does this going to affect our timelines? Again, remember, no major new standards to the end of 2027. The ones that are slight difference would be experts, which is really, we're trying to keep it a limited project for us to make sure that we have interoperability with IESBA's work. We are not touching 5,000 on in terms of experts, like we believe it's interoperable already, but the other standards we will make effectively conforming and consequential amendments. And so that will go out this year for exposure and hope to finish that up this year. Our focus on implementation support, you'll see the big technology projects, audit evidence and risk response. That's a big project. We know that. We're going to take time. I know the profession is concerned because this could have impacts on methodologies. The plan is to have an exposure draft approved in the second quarter of next year. So that is taking the time to do the work, to make sure that we have understanding and alignment. It's complex technical issues. Risk response is a big project too. We have to deal with some of the internal control issues that we discussed with this group previously. And then 500 modernization, again, that project will actually begin next year. QM and technology, I'll say something that I said in other meetings, is that we're not determined what course of action we'll take. We are not reopening QM1. There is one paragraph in ISQM1, 32F, related to technological resources with 4 paragraphs of guidance associated with it. I believe technology development and acquisition will generally be managed at the firm level, and we may need some approach to help set up the guardrails for acceptance by the regulatory community. But we need to do the fact-finding now to see what actually is happening, how much variance is out there, how are regulators across jurisdictions interacting with the QM component of it, and do we need guidance, do we need standard setting from it? But we are not committed to a standard setting path on this. The information gathering just beginning right now will be led by that. It may end up in one, it may end up the other. We haven't used a practice note in over about a decade. That could come back in soon. With some real due process is part of the project. And then the LCE update, there was a primary concern at our board when we passed it, particularly among some board members, that the gap between the ICES and the LCE standard shouldn't grow too wide when you approve. So that's supposed to begin in earnest later this year or next. We may have to, with other priorities, be flexible on it. Now the question is like, how long do you want that gap to persist? We've updated the fraud and going concern standard. How quickly do those changes need to flow into the LCE standard? And there may be need for some flexibility there, but the board hasn't decided to change its approach to that. I don't know, Linda, before I get into fraud, should we pause here strategically and then go into fraud more specifically?
I think that's a good idea, and I think we probably want to talk a little bit more about technology. When we did our preparation session, we spoke about it quite a lot, but I almost think I want to ask you to maybe elaborate a little bit. We've seen your technology paper, the position, and talking about how auditors use technology in audits versus what the auditor needs to do about technology in the company that it audits. So we sort of have that, but we were just sort of discussing among ourselves when we prepared whether we fully understand the scope and the thinking around what it is that you want to do, because in a way it's almost how do you redesign or enhance how you write audit standards, considering this technological explosion that we're going through. So it's not just AI, but it's also all sorts of other things. So the thinking around that, the thinking around how do you write things that don't date very quickly? It can become extremely technical, and before you know it, that's sort of the yesterday's thing. So maybe just, and it's potentially for the benefit of my education, and I won't say for the benefit of the education of my board members, but maybe just elaborate a little bit on the thinking, because I think, again, the scoping, the what to solve and why is really important, and it is a very important project.
So we think about it in a few ways, but the first thing is we have to keep to a principles-based approach. That is the most important thing, because if we're unprinciple-based, we'll be writing about specific instances of technology that could be outdated in the future. Our current viewpoint is that the audit model is not broken. It's about the elaboration of technology within the existing audit model. And where the challenges occur is when a piece of technology is doing different elements of the audit together. And how do you deal with it? I can't say that we've solved this issue, like the categorization of the approaches yet. Those type of discussions are really occurring in the audit evidence and risk response model. Like, how do you gather sufficient appropriate audit evidence, like the core of it? That's why we need to do that standard. And then how you handle your responses. And so that's why those standards are so important from a framework perspective to do it. Now, the quality management topic, to me, is important, not because it'll tell you how to apply whether a specific instance of the use of technology is important, but it's about how you know that the technological resource has been developed and determined its adequate uses, appropriate uses, in a quality manner. And like, this is not dissimilar to what we see in the banking sector around model risk management, model governance, model validation. And it seems to me that should be done at a principle-based level, at the firm level. And that's really the only place we have as a branch off the quality management standards. Now, I'm not going to say that it's going to be ISQM 3. That's why I say we're open. Like, there's guidance could be the place. Like, okay, how do you articulate the application of the principle with a specific use of technology, or how do you develop a framework for the development of technology? We're open. And so it's really, I can't give you a specific answer, but we're going to go through that process of the quality management. And then there's things about specific things that our standards are just outdated. Like if you think about the 500 series, and I'll take the issue of confirmations. Like confirmations in the world of APIs, it seems outdated, and we're just going to modernize in very discrete chunks a few standards as it relates to the 500 series. So it's like, okay, let's deal with the fundamental framework standards in 330, 500, and 520, get that done right, which is a big project. That's not a small ask. Let's start thinking about the firm development of technological resources and what guidance you may have to do for standards or guidance. And let's be very targeted about technological approaches. I hope that answers it.
And I'm just going to open it up if you have questions. I think on technology specific, but also the stand back on the agenda, the work plan. There were a couple of things that we discussed, which I'll quickly mention, and I'm sure people will have further comments when it comes to the work plan. Obviously agreeing that you do need to make space for this quality management, QM element of technology. That is really important. That I think there's potentially, again, the collaboration and the link to maybe the more ethical side and you know, the collaboration with IESBA on that. Do you want to comment maybe on the two things? The one is the materiality project, because that's going to be postponed a little bit, and you know, how sensitive will that be to some of your stakeholders, because we know it's always a sensitive matter. And the other one is and maybe it's early days, but just on PI track 2, but maybe that's something for the July meeting. And then anything else on the work plan that people have got comments on, I'll just take then as well. Thanks, Tom.
So I'll deal pie track 2. I don't want to get out in front of the comment letter analysis. I'm aware of some change positions potentially from what we expected in the comment letters. We'll have to consider that and think about the right course of action going forward on that. So I think it would be too early. I don't want to preempt the due process here. It's given too much weight to specific letters over the other. You know, the materiality question is, it's always a question of our resources and priorities. And we're already at full. We've agreed upon the environment that I laid out. The question is what would come off, or what added resources would we have? In my mind, technology must be the most important resource consumer in addition to all the implementation support that we have. And materiality just is not on this immediate cut. It is right there going forward in the future, but you know, you have to make choices. Otherwise, we just commit to everything. And in fact, that's complicated. We've had a quick discussion with the IFER-SCWG about this last week. We will continue to, particularly regulatory community has raised this one. I do think the interlinkages between sustainability, materiality, and materiality in the reporting world, sustainability plus the financial reporting world needs to be considered, maybe given that some time to play out, makes a little sense as well.
Yeah, and I think IFER and the audit regulators are probably the ones that feel strongest about materiality. So I think that engagement feedback is really important. We certainly support that there's flexibility in the work plan, and yes, absolutely, technology is important. I like the thought that you said you're going to only get to an ED somewhere in I think the second half of next year, because this one will be really important. Like all projects, it's really important to spend the energy up front to make sure you scope it appropriately and deal with it appropriately and gather the necessary information. And I'm sure you also have a reference group or experts group or something on technology.
Yeah, we have a number of different groups we've established on the technology side. But again, going back to like audit evidence risk response, this is an area where we see that we'll have to have real dialogue that includes practitioners, regulators, and us at the table. And so we'll take the time on that. The one thing on audit evidence, remember, we're not starting from scratch there. We've taken this approach after an ED was issued with robust comment letters and interactions with stakeholders on it. So we're also benefiting from that. It is probably the most complex project that we've taken since the QM projects.
Yeah. It also has a technology, very important technology overlay. So definitely, and from the PIOB support for that focus and the flexibility to potentially deal with 5,000 issues. We're clearly having a good round. People are happy, it looks to me. Tom, so do you want to talk about fraud on that happy note?
Well, yeah, it's nothing like getting a room more excited by discussions of fraud. Unless they were really looking forward to the completion of the project, well, then you'd be very happy. So we will be shortly submitting our fraud standard for certification. This has been a project we've been working closely with you on for some time. We did, for fraud and going concern, spend a lot of time up front defining what issues we wanted to address, which I think probably lended ourselves to have a high degree of support from each other in terms of the public interest issues matched our project proposal pretty well, and therefore I feel confident that we've adjusted, just I think some quick statistics. Clearly, we've spent a lot of time dealing with the exposure draft. We've had 14, 15 board discussions, 89 written comments, and the engagement in terms of outreach, like with most things, hundreds and hundreds of people, if not thousands, engaged with it over time. So it benefited. So like we have been doing with you since in recent times, we decided to articulate how we addressed your public interest issues on this. And really, the most important thing is the recalibration of the importance of addressing risk and material misstatement due to fraud to bring it on what probably is on par with what we think about error. And some of it is strengthening the actual requirements, and some of it was strengthening the mindset. You know, one of my pet peeves when I read 240 originally, it talks about what an auditor can't be expected to do. And we've changed that. We've decoupled the inherent limitations with the auditor's responsibility, articulated the auditor's responsibility. We're not changing the fundamental role of the auditor, but we're making it pretty clear they're responsible for fraud. Now, this standard benefits from our risk assessment standard. We don't want to change 315, but in many ways, it's about putting a lens, the fraud lens on 315 and making the risk assessment process much more robust. And then how you respond to assess fraud risks and identify instances of fraud and suspected fraud. And then professional skepticism plays a key part, and we highlight that throughout the standard. We use 710 and key audit matters as the filtering mechanism in the report. And remember, communication here doesn't start with the auditor's report. It starts throughout the process, constant communication with management and those charged with governance on it. And we highlighted that. And that's been a pretty consistent theme of us using the auditor's report and also two-way communication throughout our standards over time. In terms of the auditor's role, respect to authenticity of the documentation, this obviously was a big issue for you. It's a big issue for us too. The question is how much could we do in the scope of this project while getting the project done? So, as you see, we strengthened the conditional requirement as it relates to the authenticity of documentation. Be really clear if conditions are identified, what the auditor shall do to investigate, enhanced application material. Regarding the important view, it really relates to the paragraph in ISA 200. We're open to revisions, but that wasn't a small ask. That would have had pervasive impacts well beyond the fraud standard and would have thrown us into re-exposure. So it's on our list, and we're using the audit evidence and risk response project to address this issue because it does have implications for audit evidence and the risk response. So that is how we've dealt with it. I think it will heighten the auditor's professional skepticism of the process. We then obviously started to think about the interactions. Everything is taken together, so we've added requirements and foundational standards to 20, 315, and 330. We enhanced the requirement in 600 because it's group audit implications. And obviously this, with the effective dates happening at the same time as going concern and potentially PI, we were very sure to interact. So we make sure that any changes in the auditor's report make sense and are coherent. Like, I think we've dealt with it in many ways by having a separate section on going concern, and this is really in CAMS and highlighted as part of CAMS. Again, this is lots of coordination with IESBA on this project. This is an example of a type of project that there's not huge overlap, but there are maybe unintended consequences of us acting without coordination. So we've been coordinating with IESBA throughout the whole project. And before we signed off on any draft that went to the board, we made sure there was a final sanity check with the IESBA team. No standard-setting project is complete without a few last-minute items that came up. These were the two last-minute items that came up. It almost came up, management override of controls came up on almost two fronts. One, that we were imposing things with unintended consequences that would make the standard too onerous, and then there was a concern that we would reduce the workload that was being managed. I don't think anything is that either are the case where we landed. We reaffirmed that the risks of material misstatement due to fraud assessed at the financial statement level are significant risks. We also clarified that those risks of management override of control exist at the financial statement level, but may also be determined to be at the assertion level. So that required a bit of clarification. We don't think it reduces the work effort at all. It actually may increase the work effort of the auditor. Happy to talk about that a little bit more if you want to. The final thing was stand back. And this was, maybe this is a lesson to us and the team about how you ask the question is really important. We asked the question whether are you okay with how we articulated a stand back wasn't needed? And so a number of, including the monitoring group members, were fine with that. However, FER pointed out that this is a standard of such utmost importance that a stand back would be required. Now, let me talk to you a little bit to understand this issue a little bit, why it became a last minute issue. Really goes to the fact is the board's been grappling with where stand backs are really important, or are we just going to add a stand back to every requirement in our standards, which could be unhelpful and confuse the situation. Excuse me. And so we had no real framework for assessing it. We just had been adding it for some time. And there had been a view of this board that 315 and 330, in fact, had an implicit stand back anyway required for this fraud standard. This was a position that many of us were comfortable with at the time. But we also had tasked the 500, the audit evidence risk response team, to actually look philosophically at when the stand back could be useful. And it turns out on a major standard like fraud, we categorize like this is something that could be sensible in these particular moments. So Philippe would listen to that discussion in detail. So we got comfortable with one, that we had a framework that said that we should consider a stand back in this instance. And two, maybe this is, I was the key proponent of it, and this is maybe where standard setters should take the lesson, is why leave something implicit when it could be explicit? Like, people always could accuse standard setters of being a little obtuse. Let's be explicit. Like, we mean it, so why not? And we found a way by drawing on 330 to have a very sharp requirement related to stand back. So I think we solved a lot of the issues by thinking holistically and bringing it back to the standard. I met with FER, the SCWG last week. They were very pleased that that's where we landed. They said it would have been a different type of meeting if we didn't land that way, but we just thought it was the right thing to do. If we already thought it was implicit, let's make it explicit. Now it coincides with the framework we're likely to have going forward. So that gives you a sense of where we ended up and how we responded to the public interest issues related to fraud. We are very excited about this standard. We think it's a significant step up. It doesn't change the fundamental role of the auditor, but it really clarifies the roles, the responsibilities, and the action that an auditor must take in the process. and enhances the communications associated with it. That seems like the right way to deal with the expectations gap. So I'm happy to answer any questions on that or any other piece of work we have ongoing.
Thank you very much for that, and it is the last opportunity that we have to speak to Tom about fraud before we need to consider it at our next meeting. So, Tom, thank you. Maybe just a few comments from my side. You know that we felt very strongly about fraud for a very long time, and it not that the auditor needs to get additional responsibility. It's not a forensic audit, but the concept of making sure that auditors understand that their work effort to find error that runs the risk of causing material misstatement and finding fraud should be at a much more equal level. So there's been significant progress in that, and we're very comfortable with that. The other big issue that we had was on transparency, and we believe that the close call transparency requirements are really, really important, and it certainly will hopefully go a long way to breach the expectation gap. Is what is that, that orange flag, that amber flag. So really, really important to us, and we're comfortable with the progress made and with what was achieved. Thank you. You've included our public interest issues. I'm sort of pointing to Rathio and Pavel and Naraya, because I really like your little icons that sort of explain in a little picture what each one of our public interest issues mean. Maybe we can make ours a little bit more interesting. I can see Rathio's eyes lit up because it almost in a little picture explains what the public interest issue is about. And we will obviously still go through our whole process and our documentation that the staff prepare for us, but very important. Then just on these last two aspects, and I'll let Philippe come in because he was also, as you know, he was the observer, but we spoke about them. It always makes us a little bit nervous when these last minute things come up. In a way, it's probably often inevitable, but it's important that it runs the risk of ending in the wrong place, especially if it was not very well fleshed out in the papers for members and our observer to prepare for it. But we were comfortable that it ended in the right place when it comes to the management override, because at least there's almost like a strengthening now of making sure that it gets the appropriate risk assessment and risk determination. And then obviously also on the stand-back position. We were a little bit nervous, as I said, when it happened, and because it calls for a debate that we didn't really even consider when we did our preparation and our briefing for the session. But similarly, you rather want that to happen and for it to be dealt with, and we agreed as a board when we prepared that we're comfortable with where it ended. So I'm going to first go to Philippe, if there's anything, Philippe, that you want to mention from the meeting, and then I'll go to the cards that are up.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Tom, for the presentation. I fully support what Tom has presented in terms of, quality of discussion about the two last-minute issues, and the way it has been sorted out and where it has landed finally. I think that, for the fraud project specifically, it's true that the stand-back requirement raises an issue, a sort of general issue about, I would say, the links between professional skepticism and the necessity of a stand-back requirement. Professional skepticism being a sort of permanent attitude, stand-back requirement being something spot in a precise situation. And what is at stake probably is the risk of proliferation of stand-back everywhere, which would deteriorate the quality of this, procedure per se, and probably it would deserve, as you say, Tom, some philosophical approach and some project to clarify, these links between the general attitude of skepticism and the necessity and documentation, because I think it's a key issue, the documentation of stand-back requirement implementation. But this being said, I think it was really okay, and the significant risk, we were expecting something like that, and finally it has happened. So on the side of the public interest issues, I think everything is okay, as Tom has presented it.
Thank you, Philippe. Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Tom, for your presentation. I just on the fraud topic, I just wanted to look at this the management override of controls, because it seemed to me that it was quite a technical discussion that was had about this, with significant risks, predetermined risks, etc., etc. I think really my question to you is, if you were trying to summarize the outcome of the debate around management override to, say, a preparer or to an investor, how would you sort of simply summarize what has changed in the standard in this area, and how you feel that has enhanced the standard?
Thanks, Mark. Tom, I'm going to take the other two questions as well, and then back to you.
Thank you,
Tom.
Chair. Thank you very much, Tom, for the. I'm very satisfied with the final landing of this fraud project. I think that's the core message is not only to the regulator or the auditor, but the investor side as well. And it's not only for fraud, but also for the going concern issue as well. And yesterday we did have a very good discussion with the ICG, and then Sandy is coming from the investor community, and they have the two messages to the standard setting system. The one is that don't not only count the comment letter. The number of comment letter doesn't mean very much. Thing that we have to weighing the importance of the comment when we evaluate the comment. Not only the number of but also have to pay attention to the content, especially from the comments coming from the investor side. Should be need some sort of the proper attention. That one message. The second message is that it's very difficult for them to, how can I say, to understand the last minute, how can I say, the technical difficulties. What is the importance of management override control? What is the importance of sandbag requirement? So their message is that the more direct connection or contact between the standard setter and the investor community is critical. You first said that you would like to have more trilateral communication, not only with the regulator side and auditor side and the standard board, standard setters. But perhaps the direct communication with the investor community might be a little bit, perhaps it's one of the role of the PIOB as well, but I think that's the direct communication with the investor, between investor and SSB, might be helpful. What is your observation of their, perhaps at the hindsight, what is your reaction from the investor community or the communication with the investor community? And is there anything that we can do more or strengthen the relationship with the investor community?
Yeah, there certainly is an important one for investors. Janine?
Thank you. Yes, I have one comment, actually, that's on the management override. I was a little bit surprised to see that at the last meeting, in which the approval of the fraud standard was scheduled, such a big technical issue popped up in terms of process, and that's more generally, I think, when it's the last meeting where a standard is up for approval. I would expect that all the most important technical issues would have already been dealt with. I also think that's in a due process perspective much better if that would have all have been dealt with and only the last final small things are being looked at during the last meeting, like, okay, are there any other things? So a sort of real fatal flaw thing should be happening, I think, that is in the public interest at the previous meeting. But that's more my thinking. I just want to share that, and it's more general comments. On the stand back, that's very interesting, I think. Also, that you explained also how that should be applied in the whole ISA structure, whether you don't want to end up having it in each and every standard, but which standards should it be put in? My question around that is, what is actually the expectation you have on how it should work in practice? Is it the partner signing off the audit opinion that has to do a stand back? Is it the whole team? It could be a sort of check the box compliance outcome thing, a stand back, like oh yeah, in the file before, some manager filling it out, checking the box, yes, we've done it. Or if it would be linked to something real, like you have also the fraud discussion in a pre-audit meeting, if you would require something real, then it can really change the behavior and really drive professional skepticism if the team has to come together to discuss, have we enough to say, yes, we have, there are no material misstatements due to fraud. So that is my comment. And the last one on the transparency, and that is for both the going concern and the fraud standard. We have this public interest issue for both projects on transparency, so through the auditor report. And there's two different ways how it's been solved in both standards. So the going concern has this conclusion in each audit report on the views of the auditor on the going concern. And if there's this close call, there is this linkage with CAM, cross-referencing it. So in this separate section in the auditor report. In the fraud standard, there is reference to ISA 701 on the key audit matters, where there will be in the key audit matters a separate section on fraud that should be then also with a header that says fraud, is what I read in the standard. But here you see two different ways of transparency, and also given the meeting we had yesterday with the investor community, they really want to understand through the auditor report, it's the only product they see from the auditor, and they can read what the auditor has done, and in particular in these two important areas. That's very informative for them. So now it's with the PI definition being also not yet clear what comes out of that project, PI track 2 then I should say, that has a direct link on the transparency level in the auditor report in relation to fraud, because it could only be for PIs, and depending on, it is for PIs only, let me put it like that, but then it depends on where the definition will end, to what extent this will be in practice.
Okay,
So-
and then the last one quickly to Tsecho, and then back to you, Tom, to respond, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the first one Janine has already covered, which was around the stand-back position and how that is envisaged to play out in practice. The second question that I wanted to just check, it perhaps touches on the work plan and what we envisage for the next 3 years. But more importantly, it's a question that is probably linked with the conversation we had yesterday again with the investor community around digital assets. I've looked through what the plan is when it comes to that as part of the bigger long-term aspect and the non-authoritative guidance on that. But I guess the question becomes, if this becomes a much more urgent need in the markets that we are operating in, Is it something that we can perhaps then bring forward and act with speed on it in terms of the guidance around the measurements and establishment of store of value in the financial statements? I know we've got guidance currently, but if it becomes something that we then need to prioritize as a project in the short term, if there's need to do that. Thank you.
Back to you, Tom.
So thank you for that. So Mark, quite simply, I think, let me deal with the management override more generally. It turns out that part of the challenge was there was a misfooter in our standards, which referred people to the wrong paragraph. We were trying to fix this, and this is one of the reasons that we continue to engage with different groups throughout the development of the project, and everything is interconnected. So when you're dealing with 315 and using that and connecting to us, like one change could have an impact at 315, 260 requirements. We effectively broke a link when we were trying to enhance the standard. Because we were engaging with the general public, effectively what we did was we went back to where we were to clarify it and fix the linkages. Nothing really was changed. The process wasn't broken whatsoever. We're always adapting as we're going over time, and I think we landed in a good space. That's what standard setters do. There's all sorts of examples of us changing the standard up to the final minute. We're very judicious about how often we did it. And so, it was really an unintended consequence, but we knew that there was an issue weeks before the final board meeting. We had solutions already for the board. I think this is exactly how standard setters should work. Like, we hope not to have a broken link between two standards very often. Mark, quickly, in terms of conscious of time, the importance of what we're doing is not allowing auditors to dismiss instances where there have been management override to a very marginal issue. And I think by raising it to the financial statement level, which is always a significant risk, it will always require serious work and attention at the auditor and involve much more communication. I think that's what's the most robust thing that we've done here. Tom, your point about don't count in the comment letters, that's a mantra we have. We don't even tabulate comment letters really in charts anymore. I hated it when we try to break it out in themes. We do highlight, separate the role of regulators and investors, so that is brought out a little bit more, but we will never just comment on comment letters by numbers. And when it does come in, I sometimes jump in to remind the board that that's not the case. In terms of investor community, the fraud and going concern standards were two standards where we had quite a bit of contact with the investor community up front and helping to scope it, and really particularly as it relates to work effort and changing the auditor mindset and the communication element. So yes, we will continue to interact. ICGN is one of our key stakeholders, but it's not limited to that. And trying to meet investors in ways that they care. We talked about on audit evidence and risk response, like how to meaningfully engage them, but not in the technical details. They're not going to care what's happening in paragraph 32A. So we talked about management override. So in terms of the practicalities of the stand back, we discussed this at the board ourselves. First of all, I think all of our standards puts ultimate accountability on the engagement partner. So that's where the accountability, obviously all of the requirements of 220 apply if it's a requirement to, in terms of assuring audit quality at the engagement level. But we point to the objectives of the standard. This is why we need to have very clear objectives of the standard up front. A stand back is, okay, we've done all of our work. We have to assess whether there's sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Have we fulfilled the objectives of the standard in the conduct of our work? That's really where we need to point people to. Janine, I actually don't agree with your interpretation on taking two different approaches on transparency. We were quite intentional here. The reason we didn't use CAMs for going concern is that going concern issues are pervasive on related to financial statements, and we could disaggregate them from other CAMs. The issue we had with fraud was that in many instances, you couldn't disaggregate risk due to fraud or error. Sometimes they're a little bit of both. And what we wanted to do was make sure that the auditor's report was as streamlined as possible. So we were told, investors said that they wanted all the information about going concern in one space and then cross-referenced as appropriately. Whereas in relation to fraud, the only filtering mechanism we had that was simple was 701 and CAMs. And that really was the outlook, and I felt like we could do it. As it relates to PI, I don't know where we're gonna land because we haven't done the analysis, but all that will change is the scope of companies that scope of audits where the auditor report would change. So right now, it's just for listed entities. If we switched it to publicly traded entities, it would be for publicly traded entities. If we extend further, it will be for PIs. So it's just extended the requirement for the types of audits, so it just will be more. Finally, digital assets, we're open to anything. This is why we keep a little bit of slack at our work program. Remember, we put 5,000 on our work program pretty quickly, and we'll adapt. But right now, digital assets compared to everything else we're doing, including when we have demands for materiality and other things, doesn't rise that way, but we will still remain open to it.
Thank you, Tom. Is it a new comment, Philippe? Okay, and thereafter I'll give you any final concluding remarks, Tom.
Yeah, just a brief comment, because before I spoke about the fraud project that Tom had presented, but I'd like to come back with some concerns and encouragements too on the technology project, because, you know, I'm convinced that you enter, if I may use a metaphor, you enter the dragon's cave singing a little song. What do I mean? Some meetings ago, Tom, I remember one of your statements saying, we cannot now speak about technology and use words in the standard like 50 years ago, I would say, which is absolutely true. But it's more than that, the question of technology, and you know that. It's about a transformation. I think that the technology is going to induce transformation process in the way audits are performed. And the audit firms at the moment are working on that. It's in their strategy. And my concern that I want to share with you is the fact that I don't know if the project, due to the speed of change in exponential in the technology area and so on, is feasible at the moment this way without, you know, having a clear vision of what the transformation of the profession could be in a near future based on these technological tools. It's just in terms of organization of project, some feeling that I wanted to share with you.
Well, it's something I've thought long and hard about. Of course, anticipating business model change as a standard setter is something we have in the back of our mind, but we can drive the business model change too. So there's a little bit of continuing. This is why monitoring and speaking to those who are actually implementing the technology and those who are regulating the technology is really important throughout. We may have to alter our approach. I think we have enough flexibility to do it. But I'm not sure as a standard setter, we should be articulating the vision of digitally enabled audit and how it's transforming. So like, that's the balance. So Philippe, I'm not dismissing your point. I'm fully aware of it. We need to keep it in the back of our mind. And what we're trying to do is be set up to enable enough principles and guidance that our system can flex, but in a way that could still engenders public trust and can be regulated.
Thank you, Tom. Any closing remarks from you before we go to the certification of going concern?
No, I think this has been a really helpful discussion. Philippe, the remark is a really helpful reminder to me, and a number of the suggestions, we keep, everything is kept in mind as we go forward, and I think we're at an exciting time thinking forward on technology.
Thank you very much, and thank you. This was a really useful session. Thank you to both of you, both of the chairs and James, and for the session and all the preparation that went into it as well. I would like to then move to our agenda item 14, which is our still in our public session, the IAASB certification of going concern, and I'm going to hand over to Nerea to quickly talk us through the analysis that you've done in conclusion on our public interest, on the public interest responsiveness of the standards. Thanks, Nerea.
Thank you, Chair. So we're now moving to the certification of the ISA 570 revised 2024 going concern that was approved by the IAASB in December of 2024. So the board has been provided with the staff analysis on public interest responsiveness of the standard and a draft certification in case they decide to approve. Also, the documents submitted by the IAASB include a cover note with the specifications of the approved standard, the final pronouncement of ISA 570, the basis for conclusion, the due process checklist, and the IAASB certification of public interest responsiveness. So this was a project that has been in the PIOB agenda and demands since the last revision in 2015 was approved. And also some of the considerations from other stakeholders, but mostly from the PIOB, was the consultation with IAASB and the financial reporting framework, as well as consideration of having explicit disclosure in the auditor report. So coming on to 2020, when the IAASB decided to start information gathering activities together with the fraud topic, the PIOB was very supportive of the initiative. And since then, the PIOB has been overseeing the development of the standard since the issuance of the discussion paper on fraud and going concern, project approval, exposure draft, the revision of and consideration of comments from respondents in their comment letters, and the final approval of the standard. So the PIOB raised a number of public interest issues from the very beginning that have been substantively addressed. There was one that we've been discussing in the previous session, and is the one related to extending differential requirements to all public interest entities. The PIOB acknowledged already in our public interest issues that this has been considered under the PIE Track 2 project, and therefore will monitor the development of that project separately. The PIOB and the staff has also considered the compliance and the responsiveness to public interest and the PIF, and has assessed whether the standard meets the qualitative characteristics in the PIF, concluding that it does. So with all these and our observation and overseen all the meetings of the IAASB regarding this project. The staff considers that the ISA 570 revised 2024 has met due process and is responsive to public interest, and therefore recommends the PIOB to certify the standard. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Nerea, and thank you to Martin, Nerea, Pavel for the work done on all of this. Can I have a look and check with the PIOB members? Are you comfortable to support the recommendation by the staff through their paper and their work to certify that this ISA is responsive to the public interest as well as due process have been followed? Thank you very much. Thanks for that. And well done. I think we normally actually clap here. Well done. Okay, the next we've got, I know I'm standing between you and your lunch, but we have a few small things to just finalize. On the due process amendments, maybe just for the sake of the public record, a brief background. The two standard setting boards have always had a due process document. When they moved out of IFAC into IFIA and with the monitoring group recommendations, obviously that document needed to be firstly move out with them. I think James, in a way, is the current patron of the document. I wanted to say father, but maybe that's not the right parent. And similarly, an update to align the due process document with what is the more updated version of the current practice when it comes to due process. I'm going to hand over to Martin. There's been a lot of deliberations and we've also had some discussions on that, but maybe Martin, just a summary from your side on where we are and how do we take this forward.
Thank you, Chair, and you've set the context very clearly, so thank you for that. And we are here today after a process of a number of months, a very fruitful dialogue with James and his team, and we've come back to our board on at least 2 occasions to provide progress updates and look at the documentation in detail. And as a result of that, I think we can say we are comfortable to accept the due process document as a fair reflection of the process at the current time, and we're comfortable that that is made publicly available for all interested stakeholders to see that. We do so in the knowledge that further work on the due process will be pursued in a number of areas, including in relation to ascertaining, looking further at effects analysis, implications of the standards, and also with regard to the benefits of a benchmarking exercise. Those things we do regard as being important to be undertaken, recognizing the other workloads of the system, but to be undertaken in a period of around 12 months, let's say, in that reasonable time frame, and that may also usefully include a public consultation element to draw in comments from the broader stakeholder community. So in summary, just for the sake of clarity, we do accept this as a good reference document and helpful for all at this stage, and we do expect that there will be further work along the lines that I've just described.
Thank you for that, Martin. And maybe James, Tom, Gabriela, for your benefit, when we prepared for this and worked through this, and we've had lots of deliberations, as you know, we have said to one another that this is the document that describes broadly how the process and due process works at the moment. It's also the document to which you refer when you do your due process sign-off on every project as you approve them and send it to the PIOB for certification. Having said that, the world of due process probably has shifted quite a bit. Different standard setters deal with due process differently, and some of them have really thick books and details, and others not, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. We have recognized as we debated it that we are in the middle of a transitional phase. You've moved from before the monitoring group recommendations, where it was really a task force-driven model, with a strong involvement from technical directors to you halfway into a staff-led model. And that probably means that it's going to take another couple of years before that process is embedded. It means very different levels of debate at the board meeting. It probably also means, and it was in some of your papers as well, very different levels of how do you package stakeholder engagement to find its way formally onto board meeting agendas, for example, because not all stakeholders comment via comment letters. The role of the PIOB has changed in this process and will also evolve in the next couple of years as the monitoring group recommendations, implementations mature. It's probably the right word. So all of those things means we're probably in the middle of a process that needs a little bit more time. The other very important two aspects of due process will be, in time, how do we stack up against other global benchmarks? And it doesn't necessarily mean we have to be exactly the same, but that exercise probably needs, after conclusion of our transitional phase, needs some thinking, and very importantly, due process documents ultimately need some public consultation. So we're very comfortable as a board where we are for now, and we recognize and accept that that is the appropriate place, but also saying, let's also just make sure and make it clear to people that read it and people that ask a question that it is the intention to do an updated version as we go through this process. And the timeline is probably to have it concluded towards the end of next year or so. So basically, a conclusion of, I hope that's a fair reflection of the discussion that we had. Okay, can I just get first a nod before I go to James? I'm going to go to you just now, a nod from my board members that you're comfortable that that's where we are. And obviously, once we've gone through that final conclusion process in 18 months or so from now, we'll revisit it again for approval. Thank you, James. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure to work very closely with Martin and team through them to get your inputs and viewpoints as we develop that document. Maybe I'd just like to emphasize, I think, at least relative to due process, I'd like to say that it's been a good opportunity with the reforms to modernize that, to reflect all of those thinking. And that's a number one element of moving our due process forward, aligned with monitoring group reforms. I'm very comfortable that I think that due process provides the two standard setting boards with a very solid foundation and rigor that's expected within our communities and the adopters that use our standards. I'd also like to be very comfortable that our due process, although it may not look and feel like another standard setter, we have benchmarked that on the outset. We will continue to do so. And I think some of the enhancements that we already have within there are really quite fit for purpose for our principles-based standard setting. I do support an ongoing monitoring and look at this, so I'm glad that the documents can be used as a basis for a reference for our work as we move forward. The biggest change that we're actually instituting, it's not on due process, but it's how we're applying the public interest framework. And that is the area that our boards are experiencing, the boards themselves and staff. And so I do support, as we gain experience, we should reflect how our experience is playing out in the application of the public interest framework for certifications as well as due process. So in that light, I'm open, sorry. I think the time frame about a year makes sense, but I'd like to allow the experience to unfold so that when we do go to consultation, we really do understand it before the best product of how we're applying the public interest framework into the board's thinking process. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, James. And from a next steps point of view, there are probably two things to mention. The one is between James and Martin, they'll get together and just agree on maybe among them and with our staff a little task force to start thinking about these things, probably not kicking off immediately, but towards the latter part of the year, how to start keeping an eye on what needs to be updated? How do we make sure that we are fully aligned, not just with terms of reference of and the operating procedures of the PIOB, the operating procedures of the standard setting boards, but also how the practice unfolds over time. So I think that's action number one, and maybe the appropriate time for us to get a little bit of feedback on the progress would be at our January meeting, I would think, because I think we can allow for 6 months. That would be it will skip the October meeting, that we get some feedback on that. And the other important point is this document will clearly be put on our website, the IFIA website, or a link from our website to IFIA. I'll leave that to all of you to just work out what the appropriate way is. And it will come with I don't want to call it a health warning, but a cover note to just explain that in a way this is work in progress and give an indication of the timelines of when we will enhance it further and put it out for public consultation. Okay, so I think with that we can conclude this point. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for the work that's been done on this. The next item, we've got 2 more items that won't take us a lot of time. The next item is the minutes from our January public section meeting. There are a couple of last changes and edits that the staff need to bring to those minutes. Nothing too serious, but just a clarification on some of the certifications and so on. So we will round robin that. We've already received input from the standard setting board chairs and from James. So we will just round robin that to everybody to make sure that you're comfortable with those changes in the track change form. So that one stands over. And then lastly, Martin, we have the ratification of the appointment of the SAC member. We have had, in between our previous meeting and this meeting, we have, through a round-robin resolution, appointed an additional person to the Standing Advisory Committee of the 2 standard setting boards. So Martin, maybe you just want to spend a minute to talk to that, and then we can ratify it.
Thank you, Chair. Indeed, I can be very brief. Following appropriate due process within the PIOB, and that means the evaluation by the nominations committee of the application of the individual to become a member of the Stakeholder Advisory Council, the board considered and approved the recommendation at the end of March for the appointment of Jennifer Haskell from Deloitte to be a member of the Stakeholder Advisory Council for a 3-year renewable term that's starting immediately, and with a view to participating in the forthcoming SAC meeting in about a month's time. And this appointment was considered in the overall context of the diversity of experiences which are important to provide what the standard boards will benefit most from, that diversity of perspectives, etc., on the SAC. So with that appointment joining the inaugural members, we feel that we're practically at where we need to be in terms of SAC composition for the foreseeable future.
Okay, and we can consider that one ratified. Then we've got 1 or 2 documents for noting. The one is the 2025 calendar. I don't think there's anything that needs to be said about that. And then the second one is there are 1 or 2 additional virtual meetings. The standard setting boards are working very hard, and obviously Martin will engage with people just to make sure that we have the appropriate observers to dial in for those meetings. Anything else, Martin, before we wrap up before lunch? Okay, thank you. That brings us to the end of this public session. Thank you very much again to the 3 of you for the work and the contribution that's gone into that. We're going to break for lunch, and we're going to reconvene at 2 o'clock for a private session. And please join us for lunch. Lunch is downstairs, as always, in the garden on the patio. Thank you.